Well, the problem for Deshaun Watson is that he's running out of weeks now. Um, we're gonna have NFL free agency start soon. Teams are gonna want to be making moves. Teams are gonna want to be solving their quarterback situations. They had a deal done entirely at the trade deadline with Miami, but because the Watson team couldn't settle, like that was a condition of it, then they couldn't go through with it. So don't worry, they want to trade him as soon as they can. Do not doubt that at all. But because of the way the other NFL teams are approaching this, and then how skittish they are as far as that kind of risk, and fairly so. It's just not happened yet. And of course, as long as we have no clarity on Watson's legal situation, as long as that drags on, then so does the process of getting him to a new team. So I think in an ideal world, a lot of this will be wrapped up by the draft, and that's kind of, I think, their end game on his team.
How should a team, I don't know. Let's just say the Washington Commanders, given that we're on Trapper Dive podcast. Let's just say the Washington Commanders, who are maybe interested in acquiring Watson. How should they approach the Houston Texans? How can they acquire Watson and still have some type of insurance in case things go awry? What's going on, y'all? This is Mual, your host of the Trap or Die podcast, and I'm just here to tell you, man, while you're here, if you're new, make sure you hit that like button, make sure you hit that subscribe button, make sure you follow us, man, as we continue to push out this content and create some things for the Washington Commanders and the NFL, man, but mainly the Commanders. This is a Washington channel. I want everybody to be involved. I want everybody to catch these live streams weekly. I want everybody to be a part of this growth that we got going on over here, man. So if you're here, if you're new, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you stay tuned, man, for much more content, fire content, and as we keep things pushing, man. So yeah, get to it. We appreciate it. All that good stuff. Peace. Welcome back to another episode of the Trap or Die podcast, provided to you by 214 Media. I'm your host, Molly Mo. Henny Mo, all that good stuff. We got AJ and Dre in here tonight, and it's another recorded show. But it's an important show, man. We got a lot of things to talk about, and we're going to start things off the right way with the good man, Rivers McCown. For those who don't know, ladies and gentlemen, Rivers McCown is a staff writer for Football Outsiders and NBC Sports. And still has enough time to root for the Houston Texans. He told me he writes about them. He tries to make sure he writes about them every day. Or at least after every game, excuse me. But Rivers, man, I appreciate you joining us to talk some Deshaun Watson, man. How are you feeling tonight?
Well, I was feeling good, but now we're talking about the Texans, so that's not pleasant. Let's be honest.
Well, I mean, look, we all, for what it's worth, Washington isn't too far off from Houston, given the context of the past 20 years. So I think you guys have some more bragging rights than we do in recent years.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's a mess, bottom line. But before we get started on Deshaun Watson, man, I just want to get your opinion on the head coaching cycle for the Houston Texans. And what do you think, or how do you think that the Texans handled their coaching search this cycle, including the decision to kind of move on from Cully just after 1 year?
I mean, it's one of those things where the optics of it all looked really, really terrible from the start. You kind of just, there was like the sense that as soon as Brian Flores got fired, they were going to get rid of Cully and replace him with Flores. He interviewed like right away the day that Nick Caserio gave a press conference afterwards. So that was ugly. And then of course the Flores lawsuit came up, and they weren't able to actually go through with that. I suspect because the NFL kind of told them, "Hey,
yeah,
not really wanting that to happen." So yeah.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead. I guess we can transition to D-Watt now and just ask you point blank. Are you tired of following the Deshaun Watson situation? I mean, you could tell us the truth. You know, it seems like it's an lingering story that you just can't give an answer to just yet.
I don't know that I'm tired of it, but it definitely has dragged on long enough to where the fans are sick of hearing about it, and that's the worst part, because you can't even, like, when I write about it now, I feel like I'm almost writing for national people instead of Texans fans, because Texans fans are just done.
Yeah, I was about to say. Well, look, I'm definitely paying attention. I was reading your article earlier today and did some catching up before we even started, and I kind of know where you're at, but I think that this conversation is actually it flows well with what you've written. And so just to make things clear, so you're not covering you cover the Texans on the beat, or more so that is just like what you like to do in terms of your writing, and who you cover in terms of sports and stuff like that.
I mean, it's more just a free time thing at this point. I
Free
did
time
it
thing. I got
for Athletic in 2018.
you. Okay.
That was a lot of fun, but I haven't really felt the need to go get credentialed and whatnot to just go around and talk to people on Zoom anyway.
Fair. Okay. Fair enough. But yeah, to refresh everybody's timeline, just let us know what's going on with Watson. How we got here, like what, or should we say, Washington's trade request? It came before the allegations, correct? It wasn't after the allegations came out and stuff like that.
Right. Deshaun Watson
Okay.
requested a trade because Jack Easterby kind of led the GM search away from a search firm that they had contracted, and they were trying to hire Steelers exec Omar Khan. And at that point, he kind of just like, but what if instead it's my buddy Nick Casario up in New England, and he won't fire me, and I'll look good? Isn't that much better? And Deshaun didn't really care for that very much, no. And that kind of led to well, that plus not being informed about how everything was going from Cal. So I mean, it's bad blood with ownership that led to the first trade request.
Now I kind of put y'all in y'all. It kind of put Houston in a tough position because he had just signed the extension, I believe. I don't know the exact numbers of the contract situation, but he had just recently signed his extension, and obviously now I guess I'll just ask you point blank, the owner. I know that there was some situations where they just flat out disliked each other, or there was rumors or reports that they just flat out disliked each other, Watson and the owner. Was that something that was actually there as well prior to the allegations and stuff coming out, or was this more so just a growth or something to that extent, just something that's continuously grown and come to a head?
No, I think that didn't happen until kind of the Casario hiring happened. Um, I don't think that Deshaun thought highly of Cal McNair at any point, because I think since Cal took over, things have kind of decayed a little bit as far as just fielding a good football team. But I don't think he hated them until then. And then after that, I mean, I mean they just have. I don't even think hate's the right word. They just don't even want to acknowledge each other's existence anymore.
Yeah, I think Albert Breer was the one who had used the word hate, and maybe I don't know, maybe he, in terms of the tone, I'm not sure if he really knew like how strong a word that was in the moment, but I think Albert Breer had mentioned that part. So I guess it's safe to say that it is accurate that there is a dislike overall. I mean, it started with the general manager, but then obviously from a higher up standpoint in the owner, that it is some accuracy there in terms of Watson and his relationship with the front office and owner.
Yeah, he's not a fan of Cal McNair. That's very clear.
Gotcha.
Cal
Gotcha.
McNair himself um, doesn't really talk a lot to us because every time he does, he gets embarrassed. So that's kind of helped keep that deep down. But obviously, they've stopped featuring Deshaun Watson in any kind of promotional material because of what's happening, and not really a fan of what's going on with that because he's going to potentially lose a franchise quarterback.
So when we spoke like I said, we spoke over a long period of time, and I think the first time that we had conversation, Rivers, you said that it was kind of a weird situation to speak on when we talk about the actual legal matters itself. And I guess I will ask you, since you're currently like quote unquote living in it, in the Houston area, what have you been hearing in the sense of the locals, but also some things that the public may not be aware of from a national standpoint? Because Washington, just for an example, we kind of we for us, we have ton of stories that the public or national people or people just commenting from other communities just kind of don't have the full grasp or context or details on. And for example, I know that you had mentioned in your article that you written that there was some sides that you felt that Watson may actually be being selfish in this play as well, and this in his part in his relationship with Houston as well. So I just wanted to give you the floor. Like, what are some things that we may be missing from a national standpoint from how this whole Watson Houston situation is playing out?
Well, the way it's being covered right now is interesting because nobody talks about Jack Easterby anymore. Jack Easterby has wanted it this way for a long time. If you're not aware, he's kind of like the vice president of football operations. So he doesn't have a title that actually involves him in personnel anymore. He was the interim GM when they fired Bill O'Brien. But so he's kind of driven a lot about this team lately. And that's kind of partially why there are almost no 2020 Texans left anymore. Justin Reed's going to be a free agent. He's probably the best player left that they had from that team. Brandon Cooks is like, we think that they love Brandon Cooks, but he might be traded too. So it's it's one of those things where he's kind of subtly pushing all the power here, and then Deshaun Watson, because of his no trade clause and because he kind of directs the way that this courtroom setting is going, he hasn't really wanted to settle for anything less than total exoneration and or his trade to his team. So it's one of those things where there's a lot of ego at stake for both sides, and they've been pushing on each other for the entire season, basically.
So Rivers, this is AJ. I wanted to ask the question. You bring up the ego aspect of things, right? So the Texans have very few assets that other teams would want and give them, great draft capital. Why are they so reluctant to move pieces such as a Brandon Cooks, Larry Tunsil, and of course Deshaun Watson? Like, what's really the holdup? Is it the fact that they're asking for too much, or teams are just not offering anything for those guys that is worthwhile?
It's hard to understand their Brandon Cooks fascination. They really love him as a leader. Like, they point to that all the time. I can't tell you how many times this year covering them, somebody would ask the question, what does Brandon Cooks' leadership mean to this team? And it's just like, it probably happened at least 20 times to 20 different players and pressers. Like, that was a big talking point. With Watson, they want to trade him, but they can't yet because nobody will pay the price until all the legal stuff's done. And with Tunsil, I think they're leaning toward trading him now, but I guess he hadn't really expressed that up until midseason when he just kind of quit on the team. I mean, that's kind of what happened, really. He got like a 4-week thumb injury. He's like, I'm not coming back. I'm good, actually. So
what's weird to me is the fact that they're waiting for Deshaun Watson to get exonerated, when I feel like the trade value is going to get even worse after he gets exonerated, because at the end of the day, this guy doesn't want to play for your team. And if he does end up staying on the team with having a no trade clause, that's $35 million that you're going to pay a guy to sit on the bench for 2 years in a row. And you have Davis Mills. So would it now be the best time to trade a guy instead of waiting for him to be exonerated? Because that's even, in my opinion, that drops his value even more in regards of getting draft capital.
Oh, they had a deal done entirely at the trade deadline with Miami, but because the Watson team couldn't settle, like that was a condition of it, then they couldn't go through with it. So don't worry, they want to trade him as soon as they can. Do not doubt that at all. But because of the way the other NFL teams are approaching this, and then how skittish they are as far as that kind of risk, and fairly so, it's just not happened yet.
Well, for me, I wanted to ask, speaking of which, do you think an NFL team will take that risk of trying to trade for him before he's, I guess, exonerated or whatever the case may be with that situation? I mean, how does the team approach that situation? I mean, are they going to wait it out just like the Texans are waiting it out? Or do you think a team can make this kind of trade now and kind of have some insurance, maybe that he is exonerated in the future?
Well, the thing is, there's like multiple levels of this, right? You've got the civil suits, you've got whatever criminal proceedings are happening, which they said in the hearing the other day that, yes, we expect that to come by April 1st, but we don't know. And then you also have the NFL's, extrajudicial pretend cosplay thing. So like there's multiple levels to this, and it's hard for any team to really be sure what they're getting. I do think once we have a better sense of what's happening with the legal stuff, somebody will take the gamble. But I don't know if it's going to be what the Texans want as far as the draft capital that they're going to get back. So
Right.
that's kind of where I'm starting to wonder if the Texans are really going to be able to dig in at all here.
And, I had a follow up to that. Now, as far as capital or asset wise, I mean, there's rumors that the Texans want maybe 3 to 4 first round draft picks and a couple of assets. Is that a realistic thing for the Texans at this point, or will that price come down?
I mean, that's what they think is realistic. I mean, if you look at how Deshaun Watson played in 2020, and it brings me really no joy to relive this anymore, because obviously I don't think he's ever going to play here again. But he was, outstanding. He was obviously one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the NFL, and the rest of the team failed him every week. So I totally get that asking price on the talent of the player. Problem is, you're not buying the player. You're buying the player, the player's baggage, the player's obscene contract, and so on. So, yeah, I do think eventually the Texans are going to get to a point where they have to, do we need to just move on now? And I think they probably will move on.
So for me, all right, we're going to circle back to a couple of instances with his legal situations, but let's cut to the chase right now. April 1st was a common date that was mentioned by the court. AJ hinted to it as well. And the April 1st date, for those who don't know, that's listening to this, it is, I think it was ESPN John Barr who mentioned it, but Watson's attorney used this date as their motion to delay Watson's deposition when it was actually originally scheduled for this week, the week of the 21st, February 21st. What are the odds that he's on Houston's roster or any versus any other team in 2022? I know you said you don't think he's going to play in Houston anymore, so I had to switch it up last second. What are the odds that he's actually on Houston's roster in 2022 versus playing for another team this year?
I mean, I can see him being on the roster in the same way he was this year, where he's like inactive or commission exempt or whatever. Like that's not a path I think we can rule out entirely at this point. But I do think I'd give him like a 5% chance of being here when training camp's over.
5%. Okay. As far as again, we all clarified, that the good man Rivers is no legal expert. Neither are we, and that's perfectly fine. We're all spitballing here based on to the best of our knowledge. Do you have any further insight into the significance of this update? Obviously, again, we mentioned the April 21st thing. The attorneys representing the 22 women who filed civil lawsuits wants Watson to sit down for sworn depositions. And the court and the judge granted this week that he's able to do so for 9 of the 22 women. Do you have any insight into the significance of what's going on this week, and how do you think that something like this can play out in terms of his future just as a quarterback in the NFL?
Well, the problem for Deshaun Watson is that he's running out of weeks now. We're going to have NFL free agency start soon. Teams are going to want to be making moves. Teams are going to want to be solving their quarterback situations. I think the team that kind of feels the most thirsty for Watson to me right now is the Carolina Panthers. And of course, we've seen already, you're talking about Kirk Cousins. They're trying to dig into other players too. So, I mean, that's kind of the big domino. That's something that I'm looking at pretty intently. And of course, as long as we have no clarity on Watson's legal situation, as long as that drags on, then so does the process of getting him to a new team. So I think in an ideal world, a lot of this will be wrapped up by the draft. And that's kind of, I think, their end game on his team. But I'm not positive. And the way these delay themselves, like I've watched for, a year now, just be like, and the news is, and the news is, and the news is, can we keep the quick? No? Okay. Yeah. It's just going to drag on. That's how our legal system works.
All right. Again, tricky situation. So let's play the what if scenario here. How should a team, I don't know. Let's just say the Washington Commanders, given that we're on Trapper Dive podcast. Let's just say the Washington Commanders, who are maybe interested in acquiring Watson, how should they approach the Houston Texans? How can they acquire Watson and still have some type of insurance in case things go awry? What's some of your thoughts or your take on how something like that can happen?
Yeah, that was one of those tricky things about the Dolphins picks. I think they had a deal agreed to if Watson settled the cases, and then the other way they had a deal agreed to in Miami's mind was if they had protections on the picks, and Houston wasn't willing to do that at all. So I don't know that you're really going to get a reduction of any kind if like Watson gets suspended. I don't know if that's like a realistic ask of Houston, because like they have to look at this like if Watson gets suspended, and this is like total NFL personnel brain guy.
Yeah.
If that happens, then that helps their pick, right? Because they're going to want at least the next 2 ones, I think. So that's kind of baked in, and I definitely feel like coming in with your 2 ones puts you in the conversation at this point. At that point, it's kind of who can add on more, what kind of situation do you want to play with it?
So let me jump in real quick. Didn't the Rams trade 2 first round picks for Matt Stafford? Wouldn't you say that Deshaun Watson is way better than Matt Stafford, and
Yes.
also on the lower end of age as well? So don't you think that conversation probably starts at 3 more so than 2?
I think the Texans wanted to start at 3 more than 2, but I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work out right now. This is really an unprecedented situation as far as trying to get assets for somebody who it's almost like a Michael Vick situation, except Michael Vick was released. Like that's kind of where we're at.
All right. So last thing before we get up out of here, you said it starts with 2 1s, and whoever can add on over there. Now Washington does have some pieces. And I'm not expecting you to know the Commanders roster per se, but let's say Texans are in need of X position, Y position, Z position, whatever. What would Houston need in terms of player compensation if they were to ask for draft and player compensation as well?
So I guess the best way to put it is the Texans right now, their player acquisition solutions don't really matter because they're not going to matter in 2022. I think that's just a brutal honesty thing. They re-signed Rex Burkhead, of all people, out of last year's team, and they brought back the kick returner. Like that's all. A lot of y'all
had a lot of 1-year deals too, if I'm not mistaken, in the offseason, right?
Yep, they signed 37 vet free agents.
Jesus Christ.
So
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it now.
It's interesting to talk to people with other teams because, you guys try to frame it as like, oh, well, don't you want to build your roster for next? No, they don't want. That's not really how this works in Houston, actually.
And it's hard to do it. It seems like on how you're explaining it, especially if you have a lot of vets on 1-year deals, because now you're sitting here saying, okay, where's our starting point? And truthfully, when you're talking about Deshaun Watson and the situation that the roster looks like with Houston, it doesn't really matter what you offer him player-wise in terms of like the position. Like they need as much talent as they can get. So if you want the strongest offer, for Washington's sake, Dre and AJ, if you want the strongest offer, you're looking at a deal for like Montez Sweat. Like he should be included in the pick. You're looking at deals with who's one of your people that you can spare on offense. I mean, that's hard given that we don't have an offense, but like you're looking at the top tier guys to move for a guy like Deshaun Watson.
Well, before you answer that, River, I kind of wanted to follow up on Jamal's point. So Houston seems like they're in a unique situation, whereas like if you look at the other quarterbacks that's possibly available in a trade per se, you're looking at Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, guys like that. In Houston's situation, for you mentioned that they aren't going to be kind of relevant in 2020, or they're not going to be competing for anything in 2022.
Yeah.
What's the opinion on Davis Mills at this point? Because Washington, a lot of other teams, if you want to make that trade, if you want to trade a star quarterback, you kind of want a quarterback in return. Kind of how like Detroit got Jared Goff back in return in the Matt Stafford trade. So you look at the Houston Texans, this actually kind of is an advantage for Washington if you all aren't looking for some kind of starting level quarterback in return. Is that true? You wouldn't what's the opinion on Davis Mills? Would you be looking for a starting quarterback in return?
I mean, I would be looking for a starting quarterback in return, but the Texans have developed an infatuation with Davis Mills for sure, and I think he's pretty likely to start next year. It's easy to say that also because it's not like they're going to bring in, they brought in Tyrod Taylor this year. They're not going to bring in top of the line guy. They might get like a Marcus Mariota or somebody like that, but they're not going to legitimately push Davis Mills.
So you don't want Taylor Heineke?
we're good.
I knew it was coming.
We're good. We're good on that.
I understand. Okay, hey, Rivers, man, I definitely appreciate you taking some time out of your evening tonight to chop it up with us and talk a little Houston and Deshaun Watson, man. Thank you for joining us. Let everybody know where they can find, read, and hear from you, my man. This is Plug Talk.
All right. Well, at Rivers McCown, MCCOWN. I've told Texans fans the last 2 weeks that it's just like Josh McCown. So you can find it from there.
Yes.
I write for NBC Sports Edge, write for Full Outsiders, and write for my own site, riversmccown.com, which I just wrote a big piece about Watson today. So check that out.